Wired.com presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here are your hosts, John Joseph Adams and David Barr Kirtley.
Hi, this is Dave.
And this is John.
And welcome to episode 63 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Our guest today is Seanan McGuire, who recently became the first woman to ever appear 4 times in the Hugo ballot in a single year. She's the author of the October Days series and the Encrypted series, and under the name Mira Grant is the author of the Newsflesh trilogy, set in the aftermath of a zombie apocalypse. Her latest book in that series, Blackout, is out now. Then stick around after the interview as guest geeks Matt London and Teresa DeLucci join us to discuss Ridley Scott's Prometheus.
All right, so let's get to our interview.
All right, so we're here with Seanan McGuire. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so first of all, you write fiction as both Seanan McGuire and as Mira Grant. So could you just explain why you used the 2 different names?
So do you remember how back in, I think, the early 90s, Disney created Touchstone Pictures so that they could release R-rated movies? Basically, there was a point where Disney wanted to diversify. They wanted to start doing more things without worrying that mothers were going to say, "Oh, honey, look, Disney's got a new film out. It's called Reservoir Dogs. Let's take the kids." So they created Touchstone, which was a wholly owned subsidiary. It was completely open. Everyone knew that Touchstone was Disney. It was the same executive producers. It was a lot of the same writers, the same directors. And yet, having that different name on the cover of the movie changed the expectations people had going in. There's never been any illusion that Mira wasn't me. When I was first writing Feed, which was the first book I published as Mira, I talked about it very openly on my blog, on Twitter, that I was writing this book. And it wasn't until after it was sold that I said, Mira Grant wrote this book. And the reason there was really purely marketing based. It was so that my urban fantasy fans would see, okay, this is a Mira Grant book. Clearly there's a difference. And it works in reverse, too. People who would never have considered a zombie political thriller by an urban fantasy writer, really, were willing to pick up Feed and take a look at it. I frequently joke, though it is not as joking as it might be, that I am actually a rogue Disney princess that decided I liked profanity and porn and so ran away from the studio. And that is what you get out of a Seanan book. I do a lot of urban fantasy, which is modern day cities, but you've got magic, you've got fairies running around or cryptozoological creatures running around. And I'm pulling very heavily on my background as a folklore major and having done some animation work and all of that. And I'm pulling from the modern fairy tale narrative. With Mira Grant, I'm doing a lot of political and medical science fiction. And that's more drawing on the fact that I'd really like to talk to you about tapeworms while we're trying to eat raw fish.
So you're on the Hugo ballot 4 times this year. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your Hugo-nominated works?
I'm on the Hugo ballot 4 times, and it's the first time a girl has ever done that, ever. I'm on the ballot twice as myself and twice as Mira. As Mira, I've been nominated for Deadline, which is the second book in the Newsflesh trilogy. The first book, Feed, was on the ballot last year. And I'm also up as Mira for Countdown, which is a novella set in that same universe. When I was getting ready for the release of Deadline, when it was coming out soon, I decided that the appropriate way to get people excited about the book would be to write a novella in 30 pieces and publish a piece on my blog every day for a month. During a convention and a 1.5 week long trip to New York and a Doll Traders Expo. And I managed to do it without missing a single day. And when it was all done, my editor at Orbit was like, "Hey, that thing you did, you want to sell it to us?" So I said, sure. And they bought it and they put it in the Orbit short fiction program. It's going to be coming out in physical form from Subterranean Press later this year. So I think that actually counts as monetizing my blog. I'm very proud of that. As Seanan, I'm actually not up in any fiction categories. I am nominated for Best Fan Cast as part of the crew that does the SF Squeecast. The other nomination under my own name is actually, for me, kind of the most exciting. I'm up for a Filk CD, which is called Wicked Girls. It is the first time a solo filk CD has ever made the ballot in any category. So filk has been a huge part of science fiction fandom for more than 30 years, and this is the first time that we've been able to get it representation on the Hugo ballot.
So do you want to just explain what filk is for people who don't know?
Filk is the folk music of the science fiction and fantasy community. You get parodies, you get traditional music that's had the words slightly modified, and you'll also get just original works that have been written about science fiction and fantasy works or with science fiction and fantasy themes. Some of it is silly sing-alongs, some of it is really big, dramatic, heartbreaking stuff. I love the filk community. It's the single most welcoming part of fandom that I've ever encountered. And I mean, filk saved my life a lot of times when I was a teenager. It was always somewhere I could go. And that's, I think, the strength of the filk community, that no matter whether you sing, you play, you just want to listen, as long as you want to be there, they want you to be there.
So your latest Mira Grant book is called Blackout, which is the third book in the Newsflesh trilogy. Could you just kind of give us some background on that setting?
So the basic concept behind the Newsflesh trilogy is that in 2014, the zombie apocalypse happened. And it took us about 3 years, but around 2017, 2018, we actually managed to win. A lot of people died, a lot of land was permanently ceded, but we came out on top. So 20 years pass. You have an entire generation of people that have grown up in a world where zombies just are. They're not something special. They're not something exciting. They just are. And people go on. People do what they do. The Newsflesh trilogy actually follows a pair of bloggers, primarily, Sean and Georgia Mason. They are what is considered orphans of the rising, which means that their biological families all died when the zombies rose, and they were adopted together and became professional bloggers. Because it is the blog community that, when the dead actually started walking, was willing to stand up and say, the dead are walking, we have a problem here, rather than just kind of going, oh, it's the flu, oh, it's something, we don't know what it is, but we'll deal with it. Feed follows the political campaign of Senator Peter Ryman as he is running to be the Republican candidate for the President of the United States. And Sean and Georgia and their friend Buffy have been selected to be his campaign bloggers, to basically follow him through this process. Deadline picks up where that left off, and it's dealing with the aftermath of the political campaign. And Blackout is sort of bringing those two things together.
So the zombie virus in your books is described in great detail. How'd you go about inventing that?
In order to come up with the Kellis-Amberley virus, I read enough books on horrible viruses to qualify for some kind of horrible extra credit program, audited a bunch of courses at UC Berkeley and at the California Academy of Sciences, and then started phoning the CDC persistently and asking them horrible questions. Now, back to filk, I wrote a song several years ago called The Black Death, which is a Schoolhouse Rock type song about the epidemiological, anthropological origins of the Black Death and why I do not believe that it can have been bubonic plague, because I subscribe to the hemorrhagic fever theory of the Black Death. This is a really bizarre little song, but it has managed to get me some fascinating connections in the epidemiological world. The first time I called the CDC, I said that I wanted to talk to someone about possibly designing a zombie virus. You know, I'm a writer, blah, blah, blah. And the lady who answered the phone was like, I said, okay, my name's Seanan McGuire. Can I leave a number? Can I do this? And she went, wait, are you the Black Death girl? Yeah. She says, sing for me. So I sang the Black Death for the receptionist at the CDC, at which point she actually helped me find people to talk to. Every time I came up with a new iteration of Kellis-Amberley, I would call back and say, if I did this, 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 and this, could I raise the dead? And every single time they would say no. I'd say, okay, hang up and go back to working. And after about the 17th time, I called and said, if I did this, 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 and this, could I raise the dead? And got don't do that. And at that point, I knew I had a viable virus. The final iteration, Kellis amberley, is actually a chimera virus resulting from the union of a genetically engineered strain of Marburg, which is it's a filovirus. It's related to Ebola, meeting up with a genetically engineered coronavirus, which is one of the common cold viruses. The Marburg was designed to cure cancer, basically. It's something that you're supposed to get in your body and just keep there. And any time that you develop cancerous cells, the Marburg will wake up, begin reproducing, and eat them. Then the coronavirus portion, which is the Kellis portion rather, was designed as a cure for the common cold. And it's supposed to be a pernicious infection. Basically, it's a shifting antigen base. It gets into your body, and it never, ever leaves. Because your immune system winds up treating the Kellis infection as a part of the immune system. It doesn't fight it off. The Kellis infection is self-replicating, and that shifting antigen means that it's continually finding new food sources. It's supposed to prevent other infections from getting into your body because it's taking up all of the available space. Well, when those two viruses met, they had babies, and what you got was a shifting antigen flu that does not leave the body under any circumstances, but is capable of turning into something that converts human tissue into more of the virus. And that's how we got Kellis amberley, which makes zombies.
So I've heard you say that the modern lack of respect for basic health and quarantine procedures makes you want to scream.
No one respects quarantine anymore. Nobody comprehends quarantine. And absolutely nobody comprehends the fact that sometimes your rights and liberties do not have any fucking place in this conversation. We have totally drug-resistant tuberculosis. And what do people with totally drug-resistant tuberculosis do? Do they lock themselves in their houses for the rest of their lives? Do they eat a bullet? No! They get on airplanes. And then they get pissed off when the CDC yells at them. Quarantine exists so that we can continue as a species to exist. And yes, it sucks if I say to you, dude, really sorry, had to shoot your wife, had the totally drug-resistant tuberculosis, yo. But you know what sucks more? Killing an elementary school because you went outside with your totally drug-resistant tuberculosis. The Crazies, a fantastic movie, was built entirely on the precept that you should break quarantine. Like, that's just what you should do. I think I may have been the only person in that theater that was rooting for the government. I liked our heroes. They were nice people. It's not their fault. But at the end of the day, when you're in the contamination zone, sometimes it doesn't matter if it's your fault.
So, my dad just read Feed, and his reaction was that he could believe that a virus could reanimate the dead, but he had a harder time believing that anyone could make a living as a blogger. What do you think about that?
There are already people that are essentially making a living as bloggers, that are already beginning to make a living in the new media. It's not a great living. I mean, none of the people that are presented in Feed are getting really wealthy off of what they do, unless it's off of merchandising and counter hits. But keep in mind that in the Feed world, blogger now contains a lot of different subcategories. Buffy, who is one of the main characters in that first book, is essentially a romance writer who sells her work through their blog. Georgia is a political and factual reporter. She syndicates her articles, she sells advertising. She makes very little money, whereas her brother, who is an I will do stupid shit if you will just give me more page hits and buy more t-shirts blogger, makes about everything the two of them bring home together. So we actually did work on the economy of my blogosphere fairly intensively. It probably does not hold up to the internet as it is now, because when I was first writing Feed and setting up this world, Facebook was pretty small and there was no Twitter. But I think you could make it work if you had to.
So as someone who has a popular blog yourself, do you have any advice how to go about creating a popular blog in the real world?
I see a lot of authors, who have been told, you need to create a blog, you need to have an internet presence, you need to do this thing, who just set out and they create a blog, and all it is buy my book over and over again all the time. Now, I'm not talking about the 2 weeks leading up to your book's release. That is really the time at which buy my book, buy my book, buy my book is kind of a reasonable statement. I'm talking about 100% of the time. And there is nothing of that person in that blog. Now, I don't think anyone is 100% honest all the time on the internet. There is an element of self-censorship, but there's also an element of you have to be a person. You have to talk about who you are and be who you are, or you risk becoming nothing more than a persona. And I think the internet is pretty clever in terms of knowing when you are being a persona rather than being a person.
Any general advice on how to deal with hostile comments online?
In March of this past year, the physical edition of my new book, Discount Armageddon, was released almost a month early. People started receiving this book. And that was fine. I wasn't fine. I was very upset, but things happen. It's not your fault. Except that the ebook was not released at the same time, and someone somewhere told some message board that I was being a horrible, greedy cunt and withholding the ebook to try and force people to buy the physical edition. The amount of hate mail I received in a 24-hour period exceeded the previous 18 months. I was called a greedy cunt. I was called a stupid whore. Pretty much any variation of cunt, whore, or bitch that you can come up with was applied to me directly. I had several offers to rape the stupid out of me. I had one particular master of the rape threat threaten to rape my best friend in front of me repeatedly so that I would understand his position. Somehow raping my best friend is equal to you not getting an ebook when you want it, when you want it is prior to the release date. And I looked at that, and I looked at the fact that I was crying so hard I was shaking, and I said, you know what? That's why I have a personal assistant. And I gave the password to that email box to my PA and told her not to let me see anything. And that was the only way I could get through that process. And in case you're going, well, I don't have a PA, everyone for this purpose can have a PA fairly easily. You go to your friend, you go to your brother, you go to someone you trust. You be prepared to change the password on that email box when you're done. And you say, hey, John, this is the situation. These are the emails I am getting. Can you please monitor this inbox for me for the next week?
Okay, so your short story Everglades appeared in John's zombie anthology, The Living Dead 2. Could you tell us what that story was about?
Something that frustrates me a lot in zombie fiction, quite frequently, is that everyone is instantly a hero. You almost never see anybody who looks at this situation and looks at this world and says, you know what, peace out, yo, I'm done. And I really wanted to follow that character for a little while. I wanted to show what happens when someone realizes that the world has just undergone a sea change and they're not ready to evolve with it. So Everglades was kind of my evolution piece. It was this character standing at the beginning of the zombie apocalypse. They don't know if there's a cure. They don't know if there's a salvation. What they know is that a lot of people are dead, and that even if the cure comes tomorrow, they'll be rebuilding for 15, 20 years. That this has been a huge, huge disaster.
So apparently the Defense Department and the CDC both actually have zombie response plans. What do you think of their plans?
So you have to understand that the zombie defense plans in question, they're actually quite good plans, but if you really read them, they are quite good plans explaining how we can shoot several thousand unarmed civilians if necessary. And that is a lot of the motivation for having them. Creating a zombie defense plan is an acceptable way of saying, okay, if we need to clear 3,000 people out from the area in front of the White House, what's our plan of attack there, guys? How are we going to do it? Now, if you want some good reading, pick up a copy of the 2011 Canadian Pandemic Preparedness Manual. One of the best things that's ever happened to me on an airplane in my life is I was sitting on a plane next to this lady and I was reading Parasite Rex, which is Carl Zimmer's beautiful, beautiful book on parasitism in humans and other creatures. And the lady next to me commented that she had read that book. She liked it. I asked her name. What did she do? And she was one of the people who had worked on the Canadian Pandemic Preparedness Plan. So we spent the entire flight from California to Massachusetts happily talking about stacking dead bodies in hockey rinks and, how would we deal with certain outbreaks? And it wasn't until we started to land that we realized we had just spent an entire plane ride gleefully discussing these things.
Actually, speaking of parasites, I heard you say in an interview that you believe that you're one of the people who believe that the lack of hookworms explains peanut allergy. Could you explain how that works?
The hygiene hypothesis basically holds that the ongoing rise of allergies and autoimmune disorders is connected to the fact that we have reduced the contaminants in our environment at an unnaturally fast rate. So we spent millennia evolving immune systems to cope with parasitic infection, to cope with having things squirming around in and biting on us all the freaking time. And then we took them away essentially overnight. So our immune systems are basically really, really fucking bored 5-year-old boys standing in rooms full of breakable things, and they have baseball bats. There have been some really fascinating scientific studies done, several of which are fairly conclusive. My favorite is the Venezuelan study, where they were able to take two genetically essentially identical populations, one living in the city environment, one living outside the city environment, and test them for incidence of allergies and autoimmune disorders. And they actually were able to chart a pretty much one-to-one correlation between lives outside the city, has a parasitic infection, has no allergies, lives inside the city, has no parasitic infection, has lots of allergies. So there is some very strong scientific support for the hygiene hypothesis and for the idea that controlled reintroduction of parasites to the human body is a way to deal with all of these conditions. There have also been some folks who, because humans will always be smart this way, have been experimenting on themselves and have been, going out and getting themselves some hookworms to find out if it would work. And for the most part, they are in fact finding that it will work and it will control their allergies, right up until they inevitably let their hookworm population get out of control and have an exciting new problem to contend with, which is, hookworms, they're not your friends. That's actually the topic of the new Mira Grant duology I'm writing, which is called Forced Evolutions, and it's about the hygiene hypothesis and genetically engineered parasites and lots of other fun things that have made me the world's best dinner table conversationalist for the last year.
Are those in the pipeline? Are they coming out anytime soon?
Yeah, I actually at the beginning of our little pre-interview chat, I said I'd finished a book last night, and the book I finished was Parasite, the first of those two. They've been sold to Orbit, and I believe the plan is that Parasite will be out next year.
So you mentioned earlier how you and some of your writer friends started up the podcast called Sweetcast. So how did that idea first come about, and what kind of topics do you cover? And so just give people an idea what the show's like.
So in Australia, in 2010, they held the Worldcon. And because it was an Australian Worldcon, they were very generous with certain panel spaces because, well, it was a small convention in terms of Worldcons, and so they had a lot of room to fill. And this led to Paul Cornell and I being given an entire slot just to talk about Fringe. Not to lead a discussion, not to involve other people in any meaningful way, just Seanan and Paul are going to have a conversation about Fringe, and y'all can watch. And so we, in fact, had a conversation about Fringe, and a lot of people showed up to watch, and it was surprisingly a lot of fun. And last year, we were chatting on Twitter, talking about how much fun we had had in Australia and how great it was to sit down with someone who loved a thing that you loved. And so we're talking on Twitter about how much fun this was and how we wish we could do it again. And we'll probably never convince another Worldcon to let us do that. But God, that was great. And Lynn Thomas saw us having this conversation and went, well, we could do a podcast. The next thing we know, Lynn's given us instructions on what microphones to buy, and Kat Valenti and Elizabeth Bear, who are good friends of ours, have been roped into this, and we're meeting once a month to talk about things. basically what we cover is what do we want to cover. So for each podcast, we will each come in with a topic, and that topic will be a thing that we want to be positive about this recording session. And then anyone else who has any experience with the topic will chime in and give their opinions on things.
Okay, great. And so finally, just are there any other recent or upcoming projects that you'd like to mention?
Blackout just came out. I've got my first book with Subterranean coming out this October, which I'm very excited about. They're publishing a print edition of Countdown. I have a new novella coming out on July 11th. It's called San Diego 2014, The Last Stand of the California Browncoats. It is a Newsflesh universe novella and was sort of my exercise in giving Orbit's legal department fits, because when you come in and say, I want to set something at a comic convention, so 2/3 of the characters will be running around dressed as representatives of other people's licensed properties, is that okay? They kind of make this little squeaking noise deep in their throats. And that was maybe mean of me, but it was so much fun. Then I have the sixth book, because I also write, not just Mira. And the sixth book in my ongoing urban fantasy series, the October Day books, is coming out this upcoming September. I have a Toby Day book in September and then an encrypted book in March.
Okay, great. So Seanan McGuire, thanks so much for joining us on Geek's Guide to the Galaxy.
Thanks for having me.
And that was our interview. So thanks so much to Seanan McGuire for joining us on the show. And as we mentioned, for the second half of the show today, we'll be talking about Ridley Scott's Prometheus. And since this is such a controversial movie with so many different opinions, we have not one, but two guest geeks joining us today, so we can get a whole range of opinions. So our first guest geek you might remember from such episodes is episode 51 and 52, where we talked about upcoming movie adaptations. He's Matt London, an author and multimedia designer. He's a graduate of the Clarion Writers Workshop and the New York University School of Film and Television. He's written about film, video games, and other stuff for Tor.com, Fantasy Magazine, Lightspeed, and Realms of Fantasy. You can follow him on Twitter at @TheMattLondon. And our second guest geek joining us for the very first time. Teresa DeLucci is a regular contributor to Tor.com. She covers True Blood, Game of Thrones, and is also an avid gamer. She's also covered tech and TV for Geekdress.com and Action Flick Chick, and you can follow her on Twitter at @TDeLucci. Okay, so we're going to start out, I think, and Matt, you went to film school, right? Just tell us, give us a little context for this movie Prometheus. Why are people excited about it? What was sort of the hype leading up into it?
Prometheus is a sort of kind of maybe prequel, sort of kind of maybe sequel of the 1979 film Alien, which by most people's standards is one of the greatest horror films, greatest sci-fi films, greatest films of all time. The film Alien was directed by Ridley Scott, and he's sort of back in charge of this new Prometheus project. He's a producer and the director. So people are pumped to sort of get back to the roots of the Alien franchise, which is sort of, by most fan standards, taken a detour in the last couple of installments, or 4 installments if you count the 2 Alien versus Predator movies. I'll give you a little bit more context on Ridley Scott himself. He's probably one of the most famous working filmmakers, sort of an auteur director. He's been nominated for 3 Oscars. He's one of, I think, the best sort of genre sci-fi fantasy directors that there is. He directed Alien, Blade Runner, Legend, Gladiator, and the famous Apple computer commercial from the 1984 Super Bowl.
Do we know anything about the origins of this movie? Like, who suggested that they should do an Alien prequel? Like, where did the script come from? Was there an existing script that someone decided ought to fit into the Alien franchise? Does anyone know anything about that?
Well, what I had read was that this was actually, the concept was something that got cut out of the original Alien movie. A deleted scene of coming onto and exploring more of the space jockey's ship. Ridley Scott had a whole movie kind of planned around that back in 1979, but they had to cut that part out of the final version, and they never filmed it, but it was in the script, where we find out more about the space jockey and how it came to that planet.
I think one thing that's probably going to come up a lot with this is that the script was co-written by Damon Lindelof and seems to have his fingerprints all over it. Do we know what stage he came into the project?
Yeah, so quite late in the process. Ridley Scott had been working with another writer, John Spates, for quite a while. There was finished draft. There might have been several drafts before Damon Lindelof was brought on board. There's a really in-depth interview with Damon Lindelof on, I think, theverve.com that he goes into great detail, sort of narrating his experience working on the project. The way he tells it is that John Spates had done a ton of work, and that when he came on, it was sort of to reimagine the draft that had already been written, and that through several meetings with Ridley Scott basically dictated the entire film to him, which made the writing process incredibly easy. Anyone who's curious about the production of this film should really watch that interview, because not only does he talk at great length about working on Prometheus with Ridley Scott, but also there's like a 30-minute debate between Lindelof and the interviewer about the ending of Lost.
Okay, so Matt, maybe could you just give us some context for people who don't follow this as closely on Damon Lindelof and Lost and how that's affecting people's expectations and or reactions to the movie?
So Damon Lindelof is the co-creator and one of the showrunners of the TV show Lost. He was basically the primary architect of that entire show. It was a show that people obsessed over, that they poured a lot of themselves into week to week, that they loved, that was really addictive television. I'm a gigantic Lost fan. And the ending of Lost was somewhat controversial, and a number of fans felt cheated by the ending or didn't like the ending. So Lindelof sort of became the target of that frustration. So in the case of Prometheus, what's happening is people who watch the movie and don't like it blame him.
I'm not going to blame it all on Damon Lindelof, and I think there's enough blame to go around. There's plenty wrong with the movie. There's a lot of people that were involved with it, as you say. I do wonder how there aren't any people who speak up and say, hey, you know what, this part doesn't actually make any sense. Maybe we should do something about that. And I blame those people, right? Because hey, it's hard to write a movie, I'm sure. And there's lots of other people who are watching it come together that surely should be, from their outsider point of view, be able to say, I'm watching this and I'm involved with the process, so I know more about it than the average viewer will, and I don't understand what the hell's happening. Maybe somebody could have spoken up at some point. I'm just saying.
Okay, so we know John didn't like the movie. The cards are on the table there. Teresa, what were your overall feelings about the movie?
I really enjoyed it. I actually watched it twice. The first time my expectations were sky high. I think everybody who walked into this movie on opening weekend, their expectations were really high if they enjoy the Alien franchise at all. To see another movie from Ridley Scott in this universe and to explore some of the mysteries. Where did the alien come from? Where did the space jockey come from? Who is that race? But this is the movie we got. It's not the movie we expected it to be. So you have to look at it without your expectations. And the second time I saw it, I did enjoy it a lot more.
What do you think are just some of the strong points of this movie?
Michael Fassbender, hands down. He was the best part of the movie. I could have watched a whole movie just about David alone on the Prometheus for 2 years, watching Lawrence of Arabia and giving himself highlights. I really thought that was fascinating. His performance was perfect. His walk, his facial expressions, the way he barely concealed his hatred for some of the humans on board the ship, especially Holloway, but just in general, and the contempt he had for his creator. I thought that was fascinating. The movie was gorgeous to look at. The 3D, this was the first time I've ever actually enjoyed 3D in a movie. I didn't like it in Avatar. I really liked it here. Definitely in some cases, people's complaints about it are completely valid, and I had a lot of them too. But overall, I've been thinking about it since I saw it, and just having a really good time talking to people about what they think of it and hearing other theories.
I agree with a lot of what Teresa's saying. I thought that Michael Fassbender's performance was captivating. I was also really impressed with Noomi Rapace's work. And, I mean, it was masterfully directed, I thought, on a scene-to-scene level. It's really nice to be able to watch. I mean, as someone who's studied film and makes film, I find watching a incredibly skilled director at the height of his talent operating, it's a marvel to see. You know, a lot of people have talked about the opening of the film, just how breathtaking those landscapes are.
Absolutely.
I'm not without my criticisms of the film, and I think that John and I will agree that there were several incoherent moments in the story. I have a suspicion that a lot of this film ended up on the cutting room floor. And we sort of know, actually, from Ridley Scott's past science fiction work, that there's a whole different cut of Alien, which you can buy on DVD. And, the sort of notorious butchering that the original theatrical cut of Blade Runner got when it was in the studio's hands. I suspect that it probably was not to the same extent in this case, but there were a number of scenes, transitions from scene to scene in this film that, in the film Prometheus, that felt like there were scenes missing in between. Scenes where characters suddenly have knowledge that they did not have at all in a previous scene. Or characters would be in one state in a scene, and then in the very next scene would be in a totally different state and have totally different opinions about something.
My reaction was sort of, we saw this movie in IMAX 3D, which was unbelievable. I can't emphasize enough how amazing this looked in IMAX 3D. And while I was watching it, I had a great time watching it. And there was sort of, every once in a while I'd be like, that character did something that doesn't make any sense. That character did something stupid. That doesn't make sense. But I was actually enjoying the movie pretty much all the way through. And it wasn't until afterward that I started actually sort of analyzing it. And the more I thought about it, the more and more it started to really bug me and start to make me kind of angry. But so I think I sort of fall between Matt and John in how much I liked it. But so John, let loose. What's wrong with this movie?
Yeah, no, it's not entirely fair to say that I hated it or anything. I didn't hate it. I really think it's like the most successful movie I've ever seen that doesn't actually make any sense. And like you, I think I was enjoying the experience of watching it. I think that's largely because, as Matt was saying, that it's really expertly directed. And as we've also said, the performances are really good. The script is where everything falls apart for me because there's too much of it that doesn't make sense. And also, on a sort of a quibble note, have the producers of this movie ever actually seen an old person? Because that's like the worst old person makeup I've ever seen. It's actually, to be fair, it's on par with the old person makeup in Inception, which is like, I think the only thing I don't like about Inception. But those are terrible, terrible old people makeups. It's also particularly stupid because we don't actually ever see that actor without the old person makeup on. And I heard that was because they cut some scenes out where they actually show him as a young man, because that's actually Guy Pearce. And to be fair, it's a good makeup in the sense that I don't recognize him as Guy Pearce, but he doesn't look like an old person. He looks like an alien or something, which is really bad in a science fiction movie. I think the biggest part of the movie that bugs me is something that they actually even call out in the movie, which is hey, what about evolution? It's like when they're talking about going to find their creators, one of the scientists actually says, you're just throwing out 300 years of evolution. And it's like, well, yeah, apparently they do, because it's like it turns out that that these engineers did engineer humanity.
I can't speak for Teresa, but I know that John and Dave and I sort of all have similar spiritual views. But I feel like I don't know, I kind of came down on the other side of this, that it's okay that there was I think it was Andrew Sullivan at the Daily Beast was talking about it as a deeply Christian film. And that the story is really about sacrifice of a great entity to allow for the life and salvation of the human race. I don't think that it negates evolution at all. I feel like the opening scene of the film clearly shows that this being drinks the poison to make him sort of the spark of life that starts evolution on the planet Earth. I mean, it's not like the little DNA bonds disintegrate in the water and then reform into a full-grown human person, or like an Australopithecus or anything like that.
Assuming that scene or something like it kicked off life on Earth, the
Sure.
first thing is that's 3.5 billion years ago. That's assuming that the engineers are around, essentially unchanged, for 3.5 billion years. That's a really long time. And then the idea that of panspermia, that organic materials on Earth are of extraterrestrial origin, is sort of fringy, but it's not totally outside the realm of possibility. So I would be able to get on board with that. But the idea that what seems to me to be plainly indicated by the film, or suggested by the film, is that we share the DNA with the engineers, so somehow all of evolution was directed toward us, which is the sort of intelligent design idea, which I find very pernicious in the real world. And it's just absolutely at odds with all science and evidence and dinosaurs and everything. You know what I mean?
Jesus riding on a dinosaur.
Well, let's talk about, is this a movie in the Alien franchise, and if so, how? I mean, what do you guys think about that?
In that interview with Damon Lindelof that you should all see, he says that in answer to this question of is it a prequel, what is the movie, he says that it exists in the same universe as Alien, but that were there to be a sequel to Prometheus, that film would not be Alien. And,
Right.
From the ending of Prometheus, it's kind of
Right.
obvious. It's very obvious what the sequel to Prometheus would be. So, it's sort of like it's its own franchise, but exists in the same universe, which I think is kind of cool. There have not been many films that have been able to sort of tackle that kind of twist on the sequel. And it's always cool, I think, to see Hollywood experiment even a little bit, because they so rarely do.
And it has been officially announced, right? That has it been officially announced that they actually are doing a Prometheus 2? I thought I heard that.
No, I haven't heard anything about that, but it wouldn't surprise me.
I mean, one of the criticisms I heard of this movie, which I kind of agree with, is that at the beginning it's like we're setting off to find our creators to get some answers, and then the ending of the movie is we're setting off to find our creators to get some answers, and the movie hasn't really gone anywhere.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I was waiting the whole movie to finally meet this living engineer and hear what it had to say for itself. And we never got that. It never spoke a word. There's like 25 minutes that have been cut. One of them is that scene where David talks to the engineer and they have a full back and forth conversation. Why they would cut that out of the movie, and leave in like Yannick and Vickers flirting with each other. I don't think that was maybe the best choice.
The characters do seem weird in this movie.
Yes.
In a way that they don't
Yes.
in like comparing this to Aliens is sort of the most obvious comparison. And the characters in Aliens feel very human, and their motives feel very human. They're like, oh, there's aliens around, let's get some weapons and lock the doors and stuff.
There are many stark differences between the cast of Alien and the cast of Prometheus. The cast of Alien is principally blue-collar people who just want the next paycheck, who don't want to deal with any BS, and are just trying to get on day to day. They're truckers, essentially.
And they all know each other.
Whereas the cast of Prometheus are PhDs, billionaires, scientists, who are all strangers and don't like each other. It's a lot of contrasts. And I actually find that PhDs and billionaires as characters in film, particularly Hollywood film, tend to be very alienating. Audiences tend not to like those characters, and they do like people that have fuzzy dice hanging from their rearview mirrors.
Well, I think the troubling thing about the way the characters act in Prometheus is that as scientists, I don't believe they act like scientists at all. They do incredibly, incredibly stupid things.
Yeah, they act like movie scientists.
Yeah, well, like in the worst possible way. Actually, before we recorded this, I found this video that I emailed to the gang, and maybe we can get this posted on Wired, but it's just called Prometheus Prequel. It's this little short film, and it's basically like science class for the scientists in Prometheus, and it's just like it's so ridiculous. Like when it's pointed out in this comedic way, it's like it just highlights everything that's wrong with the way they behave in the movie. It's like, what do you do when you first encounter an alien species for the first time? It's like, don't wait, investigate. It's like don't wait for help or get backup or anything. Just go run right over there and see what it is. And like, when you see a weird alien snake monster, put your face right next to it. See what happens then. It's like, it's just so frustrating, like the way they behave. It doesn't make any sense.
The best statement I heard about this, I think it was actually in Genevieve Valentine's review of the film, talking about how the Charlize Theron character, Meredith Vickers, portrays a lot of the same traits that Ripley portrays in Alien. She's like, not on my ship, gotta decontaminate, don't mess with that thing, stick to the mission, be safe, be cautious. And that in Alien, those qualities are all rewarded as she's the star and hero of the film. And in this, she's punished for those qualities, which seems really bad, like a bad message. The thing that I spotted as being the most absurd thing, even worse than the sticking your face right in front of the snake monster, what makes no sense is that the guy whose job is to build a map of the structure that they're investigating gets lost trying to find his way out. He's there to build the map. He has the flying robots that create the map. He has the map, and he gets lost.
Yeah, I mean, and the Holloway in particular bothered me as acting not at all like a scientist. Taking his helmet off.
Oh God!
Like if anyone's listening to this, please never make a movie in which a character takes their helmet off for no reason. It seems to happen in every bad science fiction movie. But even more than that, the part where they've found this amazing extraterrestrial artifact and all this stuff, and he's just like, oh, I'm so sad, I wanted to talk to an alien. And it's like nothing, like you can't imagine a scientist acting like this. Like this is the biggest scientific discovery of all time. They would be ecstatic over even like the smallest pile of junk, alien junk or anything like that, Let's see, John, you just saw this like yesterday or the day before or something, right?
Yeah.
Have you read any of the online theories or anything?
No, I avoided everything, and I haven't gone. And since I didn't like it, I haven't gone to like read stuff about it afterward.
So, do you have any coherent explanation for what the engineers want, or why they're doing anything, or anything along those lines?
The only thing I can figure is that they created us, and then they realized we were bad or something, and they decided to destroy us or something. I don't know. I mean, I have no idea.
Teresa or Matt, have you read any?
Yeah, I have. There's been a really long article going around online. I found it on IMDb. It's Cavalorn, I'm not sure. He keeps a WordPress blog. And he had a whole really long spiel about creation myths, God sacrificing themselves to plant the seed of life, which is what I thought the beginning of the movie was, and different religious imagery used throughout the movie. So when I went into Prometheus the first time, I obviously hadn't read any of that. I wanted to avoid spoilers at all costs. But the second time I went in with some of that stuff in mind, and yeah, it definitely colored how I saw the movie.
So Matt, have you read any of the
A little bit. I mean, I kind of felt like I understood everything by the end of the movie. I mean, I kind of got, the basic idea. John, so also before we did this, John passed around a great infographic, which I hope we can also link to, of the different equations that result in the various alien mutations. I mean, I felt like that all made sense to me by the end of the film. It was weird. I don't know how you engineer something like that to happen. But yeah, I mean, I didn't feel like I didn't really feel like I had a lot of unanswered questions at the end of the film.
So why did the engineers create humans, and why did they want to destroy them?
They created them because they could. I think David has a line about that in the film, where I think when he's talking to Holloway, he implies that, he says, why did you create us? And Holloway says something like, because we could. And David's response is like, well, same reason, that's why the engineers would do it to you. And then they destroy them because they're evil. They see that humans are awful and need to purge them from the Earth.
I mean, the engineers visit Earth in prehistoric times and draw
Right.
little star maps on caves. And humans are as evil then as they are now, right?
I guess, yeah. I mean, so based on what I knew leaving the theater, I could not answer that question. But having now read some of the stuff, it sounds like there was a lot of deleted stuff. And I think Ridley Scott also mentioned this in the interview, that apparently Jesus was an engineer, and that he was sent to Earth as like a peace broker to try to get everyone to get along. And that when they killed him, that was the last straw for the engineers. And they said, okay, well, they killed our emissary, so now we're going to destroy them with this bioweapon.
So what stopped them from doing it? I mean, what the hell? I mean, we couldn't have done anything. And
based on the holographic projections on the ship, it looks like the killing thing that they created got out.
So what, were there only like 5 engineers? What the hell? Where's the rest of the race? Isn't there another planet that has other engineers on it? Aren't there like lots of different ships with aliens, with engineers on it? I mean,
I don't know, John.
LV-426.
That's right. There were a number of other planets where they were also developing these weapons. And obviously on these other planets, they also went horribly wrong. So no, it doesn't answer those questions. That's why David and Shaw are out there trying to get the answers.
So, are speaking of the other moon that Teresa cited, are we left to believe that at the end of the movie, when Shaw and David take off on that ship and they fly off, like that's going to be the ship that crashes into, was it LV-26?
LV-426.
Oh,
And no,
LV-426.
because there was no space jockey flying it. Well, that we know of right now.
Yeah,
But no, the one that they found in Alien had been fossilized. It had been dead a really long time. Since probably before Prometheus, so no.
Mm-hmm. The opening space shot where the spaceship's sort of flying, toward the starfield is just looks stunning. I thought the ship design looked great. I mean, I don't know enough science to say whether or not that's a feasible starship design, but it looked cool. Didn't look immediately ridiculous, and just like I thought all of the design stuff just really looked believable and felt real.
You weren't bothered by the fact that they have one ship that's both an interstellar starship and that lands on the planet?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's a little questionable, but I mean, it wasn't a gigantic ship, so I don't know. I didn't get a good sense of what the scale exactly was, but it didn't look too huge that it wouldn't be able to land. But yeah, I know that's the conventional wisdom would indicate that you would have a shuttle that would take you between the planet and your starship, but
when Alien came out in 1979, and Teresa talked about this a little bit already, the computer technology on that ship was incredibly futuristic. And now it's hilarious to look at. I guarantee you in 25 years, when they're using iPads to summon up information on Prometheus, we're going to laugh and laugh and laugh because it's going to seem so antiquated.
Is anyone clear on how, they're faster than light ships in the Alien universe, right? Is anyone clear on the time, how any of the time stuff works? I mean, I was thinking about it. It seems weird to me in Prometheus, where they spend 2 years in hyper sleep, but then I'm not even sure how long the journey was supposed to be. And I was like, I'm not sure that makes sense. But then I was thinking back to Aliens, and I'm like, I'm not sure it makes sense there either, because if you'll remember, they get a distress call from LV-426, and then they all get into hypersleep pods. But then they get there quickly enough that Newt is still alive. How long has she been able to survive? Like, no more than a couple weeks, maybe, at most. So, why do you need to go into stasis for a couple-week journey? And wouldn't it be better to spend that time briefing them and stuff like that, which they barely have time to do? It just, I don't know, it all seems weird to me.
I've never found the science in any Alien film to really make any sense. I mean, it's like a Star Wars movie. It's just not their priority.
I mean, Matt, you mentioned this infographic, which I haven't seen, but apparently it shows that the way to create a xenomorph is black goo infects a dude who passes it through his semen into a woman who gives birth to a face hugger that grows into a huge face hugger.
The infographic basically says engineer plus black goo equals people. black goo plus people equals crazy rabid zombie people. Crazy rabid zombie people plus normal people equals giant squid facehugger. And then engineer plus giant squid facehugger equals xenomorph.
How do you get a squid thing from a rabid zombie and a human woman? I don't know, because there was a xenomorph on the mural in that, that engineer cave.
Mm-hmm.
They've encountered this species before. Did they run experiments like this on women? I mean, how do they know?
The engineers were on Earth, though, right? Because they somehow...
They were, definitely.
In prehistoric times, they were on Earth because they somehow communicated their location, or the location of their secret weapons base, to cavemen. Although that, I have to say that the scene where the autodoc scene, the sort of automated cesarean section, that was one of the most... everyone in the theater was screaming at the top of their lungs during that scene. I mean, that was just one of the most intense things I've seen in a long time.
One problem I had with the autodoc scene was, I mean, obviously it's a bit cringe-inducing, but I was a little puzzled by the anesthetic situation. Like, why did she have to manually administer the anesthetic? Like, shouldn't that thing have... like be dosing her, like, based on what she told it to do surgery wise? Like, I don't get that at all. She had that little hypo spray looking thing that she was stabbing herself with, and at some point in the middle of the procedure she stabbed herself again with it.
I saw a headline that this movie was calibrated toward men. I thought that was interesting. I mean, certainly some of the women seemed even more like squicked out by the autodoc scene than I was. I mean, Teresa, what do you think about that? I mean, do you think that there's a gender difference in how people see this movie at all?
Yeah, I think so. Definitely. I mean, for me, I got a little squicked out when they mentioned that Shaw was infertile at all, and she's still, crying about it with her boyfriend when he makes this offhand comment about creating life. That to me was like, really, that's the whole purpose of a woman, to give birth? I mean, she just made this huge discovery that could change the course of humankind. But, she's still not feeling like a complete woman because, she can't have babies. For me to watch that scene where she's, getting that cesarean or, removal of the foreign object, because they wouldn't say abortion in a movie like this. It definitely bothered me, because throughout the Alien franchise, that sort of rape is not gendered. And throughout this movie, sure, the men all kind of get it too, but it's very punishing to the woman in particular that she has to gestate this creature. And I get it that he wants to make a sort of virgin birth correlation, subvert it, make it something awful. But yeah, I did not like Shaw as a character very much, because I feel like she's supposed to be the new Ripley. I didn't get that strength with her. I felt it in Vickers. But Shaw I found very weepy, and to have her be the heart of the movie and be soft, I didn't like it. And she had moments where she was great when she's swinging around that axe. She looked really good. She looked tough, and I believed it. But the way they handled gestating this creature and the pregnancy and the virgin birth, did not like it. That didn't bother me that the machine was configured for men. I just figured it was for Peter Weyland. There's only 12. He made it just to him. I saw some people online did complain that the machine was, only configured for a man. But to me, that was one of the things that made complete sense to me.
Well, I mean, just speaking of Peter Weyland, I mean, what did you guys think of A, that he turns out to be on the ship, and B, that Vickers turns out to be his daughter?
I thought that Vickers turning out to be his daughter was actually fairly obvious. I saw that coming, and I mean, it just because it seemed like it wasn't clear why she was on the ship, because it's like she kind of seems like she's the captain, except she's not the captain because Idris Elba's the captain. I just figured that once it was revealed that he was there, I was like, oh, that must be his daughter.
Did that serve any purpose?
I think when you look at her compared to David, that's where it becomes important, because Vickers always has something to prove. Peter Whalen talks about David being the closest thing he'll have to a son, and that's somehow more important and worthy of mention than his daughter, who's in the room. She's there on the ship, and she's his daughter, but she just doesn't measure up as much compared to his son. He doesn't have that pride in her because of his personality, his ego, his love for himself, and his desire to want to be a god. Yeah, it didn't come as a surprise to me that Vickers was his daughter, because to me, she moved very similar to David, and it felt very intentional to me that they both mirrored each other in similar looks, similar mannerisms.
I thought all that stuff with Vickers, the sort of Vickers, David, Whalen triangle was potentially interesting, but like a lot of things in the movie, I didn't feel like it ever really paid off. I mean, it sort of sets up this thing, but then it's kind of dropped, and then she just gets run over by the alien spaceship, which I thought was kind of ridiculous. And she never makes any important choice at the climax of the movie or anything, which seemed strange to me.
No, I actually don't know why they kill her. I think that there was more to do in the relationship between her and David. There was more to do in the relationship with her and Shaw. And she would have provided, I think, in any potential sequel, not just star power of having Charlize Theron in your movie, but also creating a more dynamic triangle.
I was actually kind of disappointed to discover that she wasn't a robot, because she certainly was acting like one. And the captain even calls her out and sort of questions it. And then she decides to have sex with him to prove that she's not a robot or something. I don't know about that, but because I kind of like the idea of like David being the obvious robot on the ship, and then to have sort of a secret robot that would have sort of played into what we know of Weyland Corporation and other situations. I mean, because that's what happens in Alien. But I sort of like the misdirection of the potential misdirection of having like, the one robot on the ship who's obviously there because he's not even in hypersleep or anything. And then you have one that's sort of secretly there because she was in the cryos chamber. So
I've heard people suggest that you're supposed to wonder if Vickers is a robot and if it's supposed to be ambiguous, and that maybe Ridley Scott is repeating the trick from in Blade Runner. The idea, the question of whether Deckard is a replicant or not became this big controversy that people talked about a lot, because it makes no sense either way. Because apparently he wanted Deckard to be a replicant, and everyone else thought that was a dumb idea. I personally agree with him. And he kept doing new cuts to make it more and more, to get his way more and more.
Yeah, I mean, obviously when she calls him father, she could also, she could mean that she is an android as well.
Well, of course, because Roy Batty says that to Tyrell in Blade Runner, too.
I caught that. I walked out going, he quoted Roy Batty. And by the way, who would be a better choice to play Roy Batty in the Blade Runner remake than Michael Fassbender? How awesome would that be?
Totally agree. I really think he said he based a lot of his performance off of Sean Young in Blade Runner, Rutger Hauer, and David Bowie in The Man Who Fell to Earth. And then, of course, Peter O'Toole in Lawrence of Arabia, which I love seeing that even for the tiniest second in 3D on a big screen. But I don't know, what bothered me about Vickers is I think you're supposed to hate her, but I didn't, just because she was a company woman. That didn't automatically make me want to hate her. And the first time I saw the movie, I thought her death was completely ridiculous. I mean, it really is. Run sideways. It's not that hard.
Yeah. I think you maybe tweeted that or something, or somebody did, and I remembered seeing that online beforehand, and when I was watching it, I was like, yeah, oh my god, what are they doing? Why are they just running in the same path as the freaking ship that's going to roll them over? Just get out of the way.
Exactly. But now the second time I saw it, I kind of wondered if maybe this is me trying to, maybe I'm a Ridley Scott apologist or something, but I feel like maybe they wanted it to look like Vickers had blinders on. She's this company woman. She couldn't be focused on anything else but the company, inheriting it from her father. So she had these blinders on that made her only able to kind of go in one direction metaphorically, and somehow it was supposed to be poetic justice that this giant ship rolled onto her.
Well, Shaw does the same thing, though.
Yeah, I thought the same thing, Teresa, and I agree it could be a really good character moment, but just the way it's shot, it doesn't come across at all.
No. I mean, can we talk about what was interesting about David? I mean, he was the best part of the movie to me. I mean, aside from the gorgeous visuals, he was such a fantastic character. Chilling, his whole body language.
Okay, well,
his character was...
Teresa, earlier you were attributing motives to David, which I thought a potentially problematic thing here is that you're not sure why he's doing what he's doing. I mean, like you said that he has this contempt for Wayland, right? I mean, how are you so sure about that?
Well, he came right out and said it. He said, every child longs to see their parent die. Maybe some of the characters are a bit cartoony. It's like scientist has faith issues, cold businesswoman has daddy issues, robot has human issues. But I thought David's issues were really interesting because as the humans are looking for their creators, David is there with his creator. He could ask his creator everything. And I think his time alone to contemplate, he develops his own personality when he's not around humans. He's coming to understand that as an android, like everything that he's been designed to do is for the comfort of humans. And I think he starts to really hate that. The way he talks to Holloway with that contempt in his voice. The hatred he feels for his father, wanting to destroy his creator. Maybe that's what the engineers are worried about with humans, too, that they will come and try to destroy their parents. So before they get to that level, maybe they need to be wiped out to protect themselves.
Wasn't in Lost, didn't 9 out of the 12 main characters have serious daddy issues?
They pretty much all have daddy issues, or parent issues, or sibling issues.
Or geologist issues.
The thing that ties them all together is they are all betrayers and they've all been betrayed. Damon Lindelof writes faith trumps science stories. That's what he does. And people continue to be surprised when that's what he writes.
Or furious.
Yeah. They continue to be surprised and furious.
Well, sorry. I mean, he, to date, he wrote Lost and I'm not sure what else, but I mean, and, obviously Prometheus, but it's like, I didn't think that because he had done that once for this 7-season show that I should expect him to just keep doing that same thing over and over. I thought maybe he might write something original or not rely on the same conventions that he's been writing and everything else.
Did anyone not hate the faith stuff in this movie?
Did it strike me as offensive? No. Was it redundant because it seems like every single movie now needs to be a messianic journey? Yeah, a little bit, but that's not an issue that I have with faith. It's an issue I have with screenwriters.
I'll actually tell you, Matt, the part I found offensive, honestly, was the part where the robot says, I'm paraphrasing, I don't remember exactly how it went, but the way I took it anyway was the robot asks, why do you keep having faith? And she says, well, because I'm human, and you don't, because you're a robot. And that's the point I was like, fuck you, movie, what is the movie saying? I'm not human because I don't have faith? I don't see that as a defining human characteristic in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, the same way that being infertile doesn't make a woman less of a woman. Yeah, I could agree with that.
I think it's really good that we're getting to a point where we can stand up and protest the overwhelming number of stories that are told from the perspective of Christian men or religious men. And it seems like we're finally, maybe this has to do with the internet and the sort of democratization of public speech, but it's good to see that finally, people have been writing movies with crappy messages like this for a long time. The way it depicts women, the way it sort of makes religious statements about the human condition. It used to be that everyone just had to kind of swallow that pill. But now we can finally say, no, we don't all agree with that and give us something else, please.
I mean, I could see the end of this movie, actually, you could read it as a tragic ending, that Shaw has all these experiences like 100% of the evidence of which convinces her she should just pack it in and go home. And she's still convinced to keep on doing the same stupid stuff that she was convinced of at the beginning of the movie. And if they were playing just like a different kind of music at the end of the movie, or, you know, the scene where she takes off in the spaceship, that cast it as this sort of tragedy of never learning important lessons, I would like that movie a lot better. Well, one of my big reactions to Prometheus is, I mean, I enjoyed it for what it is, but there's just so much art built around such just fundamentally dumb ideas. I mean, people say like this movie asks big questions. I'm not sure what the big questions are. Like, did aliens make us? No. Was Jesus an alien? No. What's better? What's more important, faith or reason? Reason. Those are pretty easy questions, actually. And so I just, since we interviewed Kim Stanley Robinson in our last episode, I was just reading his novel 2312, and just like going from the level of science fictional sophistication of that to this was like jumping into ice water or something. It's like such a sudden shock. And it just makes me think, like, why can't this level of cinematic virtuosity be applied to a story with real science fiction concepts in it? Stuff that the audience hasn't seen a million times already, stuff that could actually happen.
You should call James Cameron and find out where the AMC series of Red Mars is, because that could be it. I don't think that they could adapt those books into a rip-roaring action adventure story. It is a high-minded thing. All of Kim Stanley Robinson's work is, I think, to an extent. So, I agree with that, Dave. I think that we're sort of in a rut in terms of what our genre films are. But when has Hollywood ever taken risks? Not ever.
And it's like, it just makes me very depressed about the whole industry. And as we were driving home from the movies, I was asking my wife, I was asking Christy, I was like, how do these people get to be screenwriters? That's what I want to know. Like, okay, so we know all these, we actually personally know, we're lucky enough to personally know like tons of brilliant people who are writing books these days, right? And it's like, we've read their books, we appreciate their work, we talk to them as people, and we interview them, and they're genius, they just have all these great ideas, and it's like, how come they're writing books and we make a certain amount of money writing books, right? And then there's these people who have a fraction of the talent, and they're writing screenplays, and they're getting paid like 10 times, 100 times as much or whatever. And it's like, and they can't even tell a story that makes any sense. How does this happen?
My theory is that novelists' agents have offices in New York and know publishers, and screenwriters' agents have offices in Los Angeles and know producers. The other thing I'll say is that I suspect that the best fiction writers that we know, were they hired to write Prometheus or Cowboys vs. Aliens or any other, sort of big budget sci-fi movie, after 35 producers get their hands on a script, 35 development execs try to stick their thumbprint on it, it'll be crap. It doesn't matter how good the original writer is. The truth is, all of these writers that work in Hollywood are really good, but then they just get mangled in production.
Yeah, Joss Whedon talked about it when, he was struggling to write Alien Resurrection. I don't think he quite meant to make it as god-awful as it was, but he had Fox breathing down his neck. I wrote an article of a retrospective on Alien 3. That was in production hell for a number of years. William Gibson, David Toohey, Vince Ford. All of these people wrote scripts for it, and they just kept getting rejected and tweaked and tested and failed. It sounds terrible. Like, that's why I don't think anybody terribly smart would want to be a screenwriter. It sounds like hell.
Yeah, and to be fair, I know the number of brilliant writers that work in science fiction that I know of that have attempted to work in screenwriting. None of them have been terribly successful at it seems. I mean, like George Martin worked there for several years, and he had some success. But, nothing that he produced as a screenwriter could approach the genius of what he produced as a writer. Certainly. And then also I know like John Varley actually worked for several years in Hollywood, apparently writing many, many words of fiction, and none of it actually even got produced. So I guess that's the other thing is, that can be very unfulfilling, I guess, because you can end up in that trap where you're getting very well paid to do this stuff, but then nothing ever gets made or produced or anything, and sends people back to writing books.
All right, so how about to wrap this thing up, what movie do you think is better, Prometheus or Alien 3?
Oh, Alien 3 is way better. Actually, Christy and I just watched it, and I don't actually understand. I remembered not liking it. And I mean, to be fair, when I watched it originally, I must have seen the theatrical cut, and then when I just rewatched it, I watched the director's cut, or the special edition, or whatever they're calling it. And I don't know, it's not bad. I mean, it's not great, but I mean, it's pretty good. It was enjoyable to watch. I at no point was I watching it and I was like, oh god, this is terrible. Because we did then tried to watch Alien Resurrection, and that was like that. We were half an hour into it. It's like, oh my god, this is so terrible. Can we stop? It's not worth it for the podcast. So, Alien 3 is way better than Prometheus. Now, as far as Alien 4 goes, I would say Prometheus is better than that, because Alien 4 is unwatchable. And Prometheus, despite its flaws, is watchable.
I think that Prometheus is better than Alien 3. Because the biggest crime that Alien 3 commits is that Aliens sets up a promise, a very clear contract with the audience about what the sequel to that movie will be. And then the creators of Alien 3 stupidly and awkwardly betrayed all of that, killing two principal characters right at the beginning of the movie for absolutely no reason. It should start with the survivors all arriving. I think it could mirror the plot of Aliens, that there's now more than one person arriving or being picked up or whatever. I mean, it doesn't matter what happens to those characters. Those characters can die over the course of the film. But to do it in such a cursory way is what seemed totally wrong-headed.
I loved the fact. All right, first off, I'm going to say I'm a huge Michael Biehn fan. I loved Hicks, thought he was great. But I loved the ballsiness of that move. That was pure nihilism. The alien has just stripped away everything from Ripley's life. Every single thing. And the only thing left in Alien 3 is her. She gets rid of everything as easily as she shaves her head. And instead of getting this movie about a more conventional family, this surrogate family that was being set up, we have this shell-shocked, tough as nails female character who just doesn't give a shit about anything right now except for keeping that alien from affecting more lives on other planets, on Earth, getting into Weyland-Yutani's hands and being used as a weapon. And she died a hero at the end of that movie, and they should have let her stay dead, for obvious reasons. The sequel was so terrible. I loved it. I think the movie that we would have gotten, what was originally planned, was a two-parter where, there were contract negotiations going on between Fox and Sigourney Weaver. She wasn't going to be in the third movie. So it was just going to be Michael Biehn, Hicks and Newt getting involved with Weyland-Yutani. And then for the fourth movie, the three of them would have come together and the battle would have taken place on Earth. That would have been a huge blockbuster type movie, I think, but instead what we get is this weird, dark art house movie. So it's a terrible sequel, but it's a really good movie on its own. And I think I would rather see, I preferred Alien 3 to Prometheus. The theatrical cut, the assembly cut, is the definitive version. If you haven't seen the assembly cut, then you can't really say you've seen Alien 3.
So what do you guys think is going to be the legacy of Prometheus? We look back on, we're looking back on Alien 3 and it's not as bad as we thought at the time or whatever. What do you think people in 20 years or whatever are going to look back on Prometheus and say?
I think the legacy of Prometheus will be largely decided by sequels to Prometheus. I think that every movie sort of exists in the context of its larger series, and that if there's more that comes after, it will affect the way that people view this movie. Just like now, the existence of the previous Alien films are having a very large impact on how people are viewing Prometheus.
I think in some part it's going to be determined by the box office and how big of a success Prometheus turns out to be, or not. And I mean, that seems to be doing fine so far, but I'm a little troubled by the prospect that we're going to get more of these big science fiction epics that somehow turn to be full of creationist bullshit or whatever, or other faith related bullshit that I'm not interested in. And I hope that's not the case. But I can see Prometheus was very successful. Let's explore more stuff like that. And I mean, I'm sure there's other stuff out like that out there that people have been trying to peddle around. I'm hopeful that the legacy will be that we'll get more beautiful science fiction movies shot like this that at least attempt to be intelligent, and hopefully will succeed where Prometheus failed. Like, it would be kind of cool is since Ridley Scott directed this one, if they got James Cameron to direct the sequel and then David Fincher to direct the third one. But, for the love of God, do not let Jean-Pierre Jeunet direct the fourth one. Okay? Just promise me that, universe.
All right, cool. So I think we're going to wrap things up there. So, Matt, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Always great to have the people on Wired.com yell at me on the internet.
And Teresa, thanks so much for joining us on the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
And, of course, thanks to Seanan McGuire for being our guest today. So just one quick announcement. My buddy Dustin Thomas, who I met while studying screenwriting at USC, is interested in filming my short story, The Second Rat. He actually came very close a few years ago to selling it as a major TV series, and what he's decided to do now is just shoot a short film adaptation so he'll have something to show at film festivals to try to drum up interest in the story for a feature or a series. So in July, he'll be launching a Kickstarter to try to fund that. And if you're interested in learning more, just head on over to thesecondrat.com, where you can also read the short story version for free. Okay, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of Wired.com. For more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your hosts, visit johnjosephadams.com or davidbarrkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by Slipgate 9 Entertainment. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.